I ran like the rain was chasing me, phone jammed to my ear, my apron strings slapping my thighs. The city blurred into slick black asphalt and smeared headlights. Somewhere behind me, a bus hissed through a puddle and sprayed the curb, and I barely flinched because all I could hear was that breathing thin, stuttering, terrified. My brain tried to do what it always did when chaos showed up. Make a list. Find the child. Keep her awake. Keep her talking, even if talking meant anything more than silence. Keep my own fear from spilling into her. I forced my voice down into the same calm register I used with Noah when he woke up from a nightmare. I heard myself asking simple questions in my head as I ran, shaping them like stepping stones. One thing at a time. Not where are you exactly. Just, what do you see? What do you hear? Is there water? Is there a light? The line stayed open. That mattered. The little sounds on the other end, breath, chattering, something like fabric rubbing against plastic, meant she hadn't dropped the phone, hadn't disappeared completely. I pictured a small body curled tight against cold metal, shoulders hunched, trying to take up less space in the world. The image hit me so hard it made my throat ache. I told myself not to panic. Panic was loud, and loud scared kids into shutting down. The child's breathing changed when I mentioned staying with her. It didn't steady, not exactly, but it stopped spiraling. I clung to that like a handle. I tried again, gently, and waited longer this time, giving her silence to climb through. A faint sound came through, something like agreement, or maybe just a shiver. Either way, it was information. I cut across a corner, nearly slipping on wet leaves. My shoes were wrecked, the soles worn smooth from too many shifts and too many rushed walks to daycare pickup. A blister on my heel flared as I landed wrong, but pain was background noise now. I listened harder to the world around her than to my own. Traffic, yes. Rain, definitely. But also something else, water moving, constant like a fountain or a wide spillway. And every now and then, a low whoosh that sounded like cars passing on a bigger road. I scanned for landmarks without trying to be clever. Downtown had a certain shape at night. Tall buildings cutting the sky, patches of open space where the wind hit harder, bright civic lights that stayed on even when everyone else went home. When I asked softly, steadily if she could see benches, the tiniest exhale answered me, and then a small, broken sound that made me think of stone and open air. My mind clicked to a public square, the kind people crossed during lunch hours and avoided at midnight. A block later, I heard it clearly. The fountain. Not loud, but steady, like someone exhaling forever. I changed direction again, and my stomach dropped with the weirdest mix of relief and dread. Relief because I thought I knew where she was. Dread because the same thought followed immediately. If she's out in the open, why hasn't anyone helped her? The square opened up ahead of me, a darker patch of sky framed by buildings. Street lamps threw pale circles on wet pavement. Benches sat like forgotten furniture. And in the middle distance, the fountain caught the light and threw it back in ripples. I slowed down. Not because I was tired, but because running straight at a frightened child could make things worse. I kept the phone to my ear but lowered my voice, the way you do when you're approaching a skittish animal. I spotted her under a tree near the edge of the light. At first she looked like a discarded backpack, a small shape, folded in on itself. Then she moved, and the movement was wrong, too stiff, too shaky. Her dark hair was plastered to her cheeks in wet ropes. Her uniform, some kind of private school thing, navy and crisp in a world where my clothes were permanently stained with diner. Coffee was soaked through, clinging to her like she'd been pulled from a pool. The expensive kind of outfit that didn't belong on a bench in December. Her hands were wrapped around a small pink phone with a spiderweb crack across the screen. Her lips had a bluish tint that made my nursing student brain light up in alarm. But I didn't let my face show it. I didn't want to add fear to fear. I crouched a few feet away, keeping my hands where she could see them. I let my body go loose, non-threatening. My palms smelled faintly like coffee and dish soap, everything the diner left on you, no matter how many times you washed. She looked at me once, quick as a flinch, and then looked away like eye contact cost too much. I told her, in my head and through my tone, that she wasn't in trouble, that I wasn't here to ask her to explain herself, that I just wanted her warm. I slid my jacket off, even though the cold bit my skin immediately, and draped it around her shoulders. She didn't resist. That one detail, no resistance, was its own kind of permission. Up close, I could see how small she was. Not toddler small, but still a child. Too young to be out here alone. Her eyelashes were clumped with rain. Her cheeks were pale. Her whole body shivered in waves that looked painful. I kept my movements slow and practical. I rubbed her arms through the jacket, not fast enough to startle, not slow enough to be useless. I checked her hands, trying to get a sense of how cold they were, without turning it into a dramatic moment. Cold, yes. Stiff. But she was conscious. She was breathing. She was here. I glanced around the square. No one else in the immediate circle of light. No parent running up, no security guard, no group of drunk friends, just wet concrete and wind. The question I didn't want to ask pressed against my ribs anyway. How long has she been sitting here? I reached into my pocket for my phone charger cord out of habit and laughed silently at myself. Like a cord could fix this. My instinct screamed to call 911. It was the responsible thing, the textbook thing, the thing that kept people alive. But the moment my hand moved, her whole body tightened. Not just a flinch, a full body recoil. Her eyes snapped to my phone with something sharp and panicked. Her fingers clamped around her cracked pink device like it was the only anchor she had left. Fear of the police? Fear of adults? Fear of being found? My mind flashed to Noah again, how he clung to me in unfamiliar places. How kids could tell the difference between help and danger even when adults insisted they were the same thing. The girl, Lily, though I didn't know her name yet, fumbled with her phone. Her hands shook so badly she had to try twice. She didn't speak. Not really. She didn't have to. She swiped, tapped, swiped again, and then turned the screen toward me with a kind of trembling determination. One contact filled the display, simple and bold. Dad. She lifted her eyes to mine, and in that look was a whole set of rules I didn't understand but could feel in my bones. Don't call the police. Don't call anyone else. Call him. My thumb hovered over the call button, and my pulse thudded in my ears louder than the fountain. What kind of father makes a child choose this? Still, Lily's small fingers stayed curled around my sleeve through the jacket I'd given her, like she'd already decided I was her bridge. So I inhaled, held her closer, and lowered my thumb. My thumb hovered over the call button like it weighed more than the whole phone. Lily's cracked pink screen glowed against the rain-dark square, and her fingers stayed locked around my sleeve. She didn't nod. She didn't plead. She just held that one contact up like it was the only door she trusted. So I pressed call. The line barely had time to ring before it picked up, and the voice on the other end hit me like cold water. Not loud, not dramatic, just used to urgency, used to getting calls that changed nights into emergencies. The first thing he said, more a question than a greeting, made my stomach drop, because it sounded like something he'd asked too many times before. Like bad news was his normal. I steadied my breathing on purpose. Nursing school had taught me how fast panic spreads, and motherhood had taught me how quickly a child copies whatever's on your face. I tucked Lily closer, angled my body to block the wind, and focused on facts. I told him I'd found a child alone in the rain in a downtown square, that she was soaked through and shaking hard, that her lips had a bluish tint and her speech was limited. I described the fountain, benches, the civic buildings with lights still on. I kept my words simple, clinical, the way I would report vitals at a hospital check-in. Anything emotional could wait. On the other end, the man's breathing changed, not into panic, into action. I could hear movement behind his voice, like doors opening, voices cutting in and out, the clipped rhythm of someone giving instructions without wasting syllables. It felt like I'd called a person and reached an entire system. Part of me wanted to hang up and call 911 anyway. The sensible part. The part that still believed the world was divided cleanly into safe and unsafe, legal and illegal, help and harm. But Lily flinched when my phone shifted in my hand, like she could sense what I was considering. Her fear wasn't vague. It had shape. It had history. So I stayed with the choice she'd made. The man on the phone asked for details with a precision that made me think of a checklist. Location, condition, whether she was with anyone, whether she could walk, whether I saw anything around us that didn't belong. He never once asked who I was first. That came later, and even then, it sounded less like curiosity and more like filing. Like he'd put me in a folder in his head and slid it into a drawer. I told him I wasn't moving her far, that I'd wrapped her in my jacket, that I was keeping her awake and warm as best I could. I tried to sound confident. My hands were going numb. Then his voice tightened, not into anger, not into pleading, into certainty, the kind that doesn't invite debate, the kind that makes you realize you're not in a conversation anymore. You're in someone else's plan. And then, as if the city itself was obeying him, the sound arrived first. Tires on wet pavement, not the lazy roll of commuters, but the controlled surge of vehicles that didn't worry about being noticed. Engines idling with purpose. Doors opening and closing in quick sequence. Footsteps, many spreading out across the square. I turned my head and saw them. Black SUVs sliding up to the curb line like they owned it. Not one. Several. Headlights cut through the rain and painted the fountain mist in white streaks. Men stepped out in dark coats, scanning the square with a practiced sweep that made my skin tighten. They didn't look lost. They didn't look surprised to find a child on a bench at midnight. They looked like they'd expected threats, not a rescue. A loose perimeter formed without anyone needing to shout about it. 2 men moved closer, eyes flicking over me, over Lily, over the shadows under trees. Another stayed back, angled toward the street, watching the approach routes like the rain itself might carry trouble. And then he appeared. Damien Cross didn't rush. He didn't look around like a frantic parent searching for a lost kid. He moved through the rain with a steady, predatory grace that made the square feel smaller, tall, broad-shouldered. Dark coat, expensive enough to look wrong under streetlights. The kind of man who made the air change just by entering it. When his gaze landed on Lily, something in him softened so quickly I almost doubted I'd seen it. Relief, maybe. Fear held in iron. He dropped down in front of her like it was the only place he belonged in that moment. Lily's whole body shifted toward him, and I felt her cling loosen from my sleeve as if her system recognized him like home, even if home was complicated. She tried to sit up, swayed, and Damien's hands were there immediately, steady, careful, practiced. He wrapped her in his coat, folding warmth around her like armor, then lifted her against his chest. It was tender in a way that didn't match the rest of him. The contrast was jarring. This man looked like he could walk into a room and silence it with a glance, and yet he held his daughter like she was the only fragile thing in his world that mattered. Then his eyes came to me. The softness disappeared, replaced by something colder and sharper, like a camera focusing. His gaze traveled fast. My soaked diner hoodie, my apron still tied, my worn shoes, my red hands. It didn't feel like judgment exactly. It felt like assessment. I suddenly became aware of how out of place I was beside those vehicles, beside those men who moved like they'd been trained to protect and remove obstacles. My throat tightened with the weirdest embarrassment, like I'd walked into the wrong building and everyone knew it. I realized, in that single look, that I wasn't just the woman who answered a call. I was now connected to this child. And that connection meant something in Damien's world. A man with a neat haircut and an earpiece stepped closer, not threatening, but definite. His body positioned itself in a way that said he could guide me whether I wanted it or not. Damien adjusted Lily in his arms, shielding her face from the rain, and said something to the men around him without raising his voice. They moved instantly. Everything about it screamed control. I thought again about 911, about flashing lights and official help. But in this moment, help had already arrived, dark, private, efficient. What kind of father shows up like a storm and makes the whole street obey? I swallowed and tried to step back, to reclaim the idea that I could simply go home to Noah and pretend this was a strange, terrifying detour. But the way Damien's eyes stayed on me briefly, measuring, made me understand something I didn't want to understand. In his world, you didn't just walk away from the center of a crisis. And as the man with the earpiece hovered near my elbow, guiding me toward the nearest SUV, I had the sharp, sinking feeling that I wasn't sure I was allowed to leave. By the time I got Noah back into our apartment, the night felt like a fever dream I'd scraped off my skin and left on the sidewalk. I peeled off my wet hoodie, wrung it out over the bathtub, and stood there for a second staring at my own hands, red, raw, smelling like diner coffee and cold air. Noah was asleep on the couch in the same clothes I dropped him off in that morning, his small sneaker half off, his hair sticking up in the back like he'd fought sleep and lost. I watched his chest rise and fall until my heartbeat finally remembered how to slow down. Then reality rolled in like it always did. A daycare notice on my phone about late pickup policies. A reminder from the utility company. A sticky note I'd slapped on the fridge that said rent in all caps, like yelling at myself would make money appear. I told myself I'd go to bed. I told myself I'd forget the black SUVs, the men who moved like shadows, the way Damien Cross looked at me like I was a detail in a report. But even when I closed my eyes, I could still see Lily's lips tinted blue. I could still feel how her fingers clung to my sleeve, how she chose her father's number like it was the safest option in a world where police weren't. I slept in scraps. In the morning, I did what I always did. I got Noah dressed with one eye on the clock and one eye on the fridge calendar. I made oatmeal that he barely touched. I packed his little lunchbox and checked my bank app like I could negotiate with it. I moved through our apartment fast, careful not to step on the weak floorboard by the kitchen sink that always squeaked. I kept telling myself the man in the rain was gone. Then I opened the front door and saw the black sedan parked at the curb like it belonged there. Not flashy, Not loud, just present. A man leaned against it under an umbrella, posture relaxed in a way that didn't feel relaxed at all. He looked like the kind of person who could wait for hours without getting bored or uncomfortable, because waiting was part of his job. When he lifted his head, his expression was polite, almost gentle, like we were meeting for coffee. Except my stomach sank anyway. I tightened my grip on Noah's hand and automatically scanned the hallway behind me, neighbors' doors, stairwell, the corner where the security camera in our building hadn't worked since summer. My body did the math before my brain caught up. The man's eyes flicked to Noah and back to me. Not hungry, not cruel, just measuring the situation. I understood without him having to say it. Damien Cross hadn't disappeared. He'd simply relocated his attention. The man made it clear, in a calm way that didn't leave room for refusal, that Damien wanted to speak with me. Not later, not through a phone call. Today. Noah tugged at my sleeve, sensing my tension. I told myself to stay calm for him, the way I always did. I told myself I could still choose. I could still say no. But even my thoughts sounded thin. I called daycare, hands shaking slightly as I explained I'd be late. I dropped Noah off with a smile that felt like a lie and kissed his forehead longer than usual, breathing in the warm cereal smell of his hair like it was oxygen. Then I walked back outside to that waiting car. The ride felt like a border crossing. Tinted windows shut out my neighborhood's cracked sidewalks and battered mailboxes. The city shifted as we drove fewer bus stops, cleaner streets, taller trees. I watched rain glide down the glass in perfect lines and tried not to imagine what Noah would do if I didn't come back on time. We passed gates. We passed homes that looked like they'd been built to keep history intact. At some point, the streets stopped feeling public. When we pulled up to Damien's residence, my first thought was that it didn't look like a boss house. It looked like old money, quiet power, the kind that didn't need to shout because everyone already listened. Inside, the air was warm, dry, and still. A housekeeper appeared with a calm face that suggested she'd seen every kind of drama without ever letting it touch her posture. I followed her down a hallway that smelled like wood polish and expensive candles, my wet shoes making a sound that suddenly felt too loud. The study was exactly what I expected, and somehow worse books, dark leather, clean lines, everything arranged like a statement. Damien Cross stood when I entered, and the room felt smaller immediately. He looked as controlled in daylight as he did in the rain. If anything, the calm made him more intimidating. He didn't need chaos to look dangerous. I stayed near the door. My instincts wanted an exit. He guided the conversation, the way he guided everything quietly, efficiently. I could tell he was watching for how I reacted, not just what I said. Like this wasn't gratitude. It was evaluation. The first truth landed with a weight that made me forget to blink. Lily was recovering physically. Warmed up, checked over, monitored. But the bigger issue wasn't the cold. It was the silence. Damien let me understand, piece by piece, that Lily hadn't spoken since her mother died. Not a gradual, quiet, a hard stop. Months of a child living inside herself, refusing the world. Therapists, teachers, family. Nothing had reached her. Until last night. And then came the detail that made my scalp prickle. Lily hadn't called random numbers. She'd found mine on a receipt from the diner. A stupid little strip of paper I'd tossed into the register without thinking. My name, my handwriting, the same scribbled total I wrote 100 times a shift. Ordinary life brushing up against tragedy like it was fate. I remembered them now, Lily sitting with a woman, quiet and watchful. I'd been rushing, juggling tables, not noticing how carefully Lily watched everything. I'd served them like any other customer. I'd never known I was leaving breadcrumbs. I didn't know what to do with that. My world was built out of routines and survival and bills. His world was built out of something bigger, heavier, with consequences that followed you home. Damien made it clear that he didn't bring me here to thank me and send me away. He brought me here because Lily responded to me, because she chose my number when she couldn't choose her own voice. And then the offer arrived, laid down like a contract disguised as a solution. A live-in caretaker role, focused on Lily, a monthly salary of $9,000. The number hit me like a physical shove. My brain tried to reject it on principle, but my body did the math anyway. Rent, tuition, daycare, groceries, the constant fear of one emergency collapsing my whole life. I felt anger rise, sharp and immediate, because I didn't want to be bought. I didn't want to be the kind of person who said yes because money made the room tilt. But then Damien did something that turned my anger into something hotter. He produced a folder manila, neat, my name typed on the tab like I was a case file. Inside were letters on crisp letterhead from universities I'd only ever seen in brochures. Scholarship offers, transfer pathways, the kind of opportunities people told me were for other girls with better families and fewer foster homes. The dates on the letters stung. Years ago, back when I'd been working nights and taking classes during the day, convinced I was invisible. Back when I'd told myself I didn't get scholarships because I wasn't special enough. I stared at those pages and felt the ground shift under me. Because it wasn't that I hadn't been chosen. It was that someone had taken the choice away before I ever knew it existed. My hands tightened around the folder. I could feel my pulse in my wrists. All I could think of was how many times I'd cried quietly in the bathroom at the diner. How many times I'd told myself to stop dreaming and be realistic. And now I was looking at proof that realism had been forced on me. I didn't feel jealous of Damien's wealth. I felt furious at the injustice of my life being edited by someone else's decisions. Damien didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to threaten. The offer sat between us like a locked door with a key in his hand. Money, stability, a path forward, and Lily, a child who had reached for me in the rain like I was her last safe idea. I thought of Noah's face at daycare, how he watched me leave like he was used to uncertainty. I thought of Lily on that bench, shaking, following rules I didn't understand. What do you do when the answer that saves your child might trap you? I held the folder tighter, felt the paper cut into my palm, and realized saying no might cost Lily, and saying yes might cost me something I couldn't afford to lose. I told myself it was temporary, the way people tell themselves a storm will pass if they don't look at the radar. Temporary meant I didn't have to think too far ahead. Temporary meant I could do the math and call it responsible. $9,000 a month meant Noah's daycare wouldn't feel like a countdown bomb. It meant rent wouldn't swallow me whole. It meant I could breathe long enough to finish nursing school without constantly choosing which bill got ignored. Temporary meant I could help Lily and still keep my life mine. So I packed like I was running from a fire. I didn't have much Noah's clothes folded into uneven stacks. My scrubs and textbooks, a shoebox of documents I'd learned to keep ready since foster care. I threw in the cheap thermometer I trusted, my stethoscope, Noah's allergy meds, and the one framed photo I owned where he's missing a front tooth and grinning like he knows a secret. Noah watched from the couch, quieter than usual. He clutched his stuffed turtle so hard its seams puckered. Every few minutes he looked at me like he was asking if this was one of those moves where you don't come back. I kept my voice steady anyway, even as my stomach twisted. I explained it in the only language that made sense to me. We were going somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere I could work and still come home to him every night. I promised him I'd still be his mom in the same way I promised myself I wouldn't get swallowed by Damien Cross's world. The car that arrived wasn't the black sedan from yesterday. It was bigger, newer, quiet like it didn't need to announce itself. The driver didn't talk much. He didn't have to. The way he opened doors and waited made it clear this wasn't a rideshare. It was an operation. Seattle blurred behind tinted glass. My neighborhood disappeared first, then the streets I knew, then even the feeling of being in the same city. We passed through a gate that didn't just open. It yielded. Cameras tilted as we approached, tracking us like polite eyes. A guardhouse sat back from the road like decoration, but nothing about it was decorative. Trees lined the driveway, tall and still, and the silence felt intentional, as if sound itself was managed here. When the mansion came into view, Noah leaned closer to me without thinking. I felt his small fingers hook into my sleeve. My mother mind went on alert automatically, scanning for exits, noticing the spacing of lights, the way corners were covered. A home? Sure, but also a place built to control what came in and what stayed out. Inside, staff moved like a current, quiet, efficient, faces calm in a way that made me feel louder just by existing. Someone took our bags before I could refuse. Someone else guided us down a hall that smelled faintly of lemon polish and clean linen. I tried not to stare, but my eyes caught on details anyway. Discreet cameras tucked into molding, a keypad beside a door that looked like any other door. The absence of personal clutter. No toys in the main corridor, no shoes by the entry, no normal mess. We were led away from the grand part of the house and into what they called the East Wing. The second we crossed into it, the air changed. Warmer, softer, like the mansion had an inside pocket made for people who needed comfort without access. It was a self-contained mini apartment, a small kitchen with spotless counters, a sitting room with a couch deep enough to disappear into, a dining nook with chairs that didn't squeak, and a hallway that led to 2 bedrooms and a bathroom stocked with more towels than I'd owned in my whole adult life. French doors opened to a courtyard garden stone path, winter bare branches, a bench under a covered awning where you could sit and pretend the world didn't exist. It was beautiful. It also felt like a gentle cage. No neighbors, no street noise, no random knocks on the door. Even the quiet had a polished edge, like it had been curated. Noah patted across the rug, eyes wide, and then stopped, looking back at me for confirmation. I nodded, tried to smile. He set his turtle on the couch like he was claiming territory, then wandered toward the courtyard doors and pressed his palm to the glass. His breath fogged a small circle in the cold. I unpacked like I always do when I'm scared, making order out of chaos. Toothbrushes in cups, Noah's pajamas in the top drawer, my notebooks stacked on the desk like a promise to myself. I found myself checking the locks twice without thinking. The latch clicked with a clean final sound that made my spine stiffen. Then Lily arrived. Not carried this time. Not rescued from rain. Just escorted, quiet as a shadow, wearing fresh clothes that still looked too expensive for my hands to touch. Her hair was dry, brush smooth, and her cheeks had color again, but her eyes stayed guarded. I didn't push. I didn't rush into cheerfulness. I treated her the way I would treat Noah after a nightmare, like the world was too loud, and she needed someone to sit in the quiet with her. I set up a routine that didn't demand words. Warm cocoa in mugs that were safe to hold. A blanket corner on the couch with a soft lamp instead of the ceiling light. Books laid out like options, not assignments. I narrated my actions gently as I moved, washing a cup, folding a towel, setting out crayons so silence wouldn't feel like pressure. Lily hovered at the edge of the room, hands clenched, shoulders tight. I kept my body angled away from her, giving her space to approach on her own terms. Every few minutes, I glanced toward her and then looked away again, like I was saying, I see you, but I won't trap you with attention. Noah tried to help in his own small way. He sat cross-legged on the rug, rolling a toy car back and forth quietly, watching Lily like he was trying to understand her rules. He didn't speak much either. He matched her silence instinctively, which made my throat ache with pride and heartbreak at the same time. Tiny progress came in tiny forms. Lily's fingers loosened around her sleeves. Her breathing stopped trembling. When I offered a book by sliding it closer instead of handing it to her, she nudged it with one cautious finger. Later, when Noah sneezed and startled himself, Lily's eyes flicked to him, just for a second eye contact, then away again. But it was something. A crack in the wall. For a moment, hope warmed me more than the cocoa did. Then Noah wandered. It happened in the normal, innocent way kids wander, one quiet hallway, one curious hand. I was rinsing mugs when I realized he'd gone too silent. My chest tightened instantly. I dried my hands on a towel and followed the sound of nothing. He stood at the end of the hall, palm resting on a panel I hadn't noticed before. It looked like wall. Not a door, but now that it was slightly ajar, I could see the seam perfectly cut, invisible unless you knew to look. Cool air leaked through, carrying a faint electronic hum. Beyond it was a narrow corridor that shouldn't exist in a house this symmetrical. Noah turned his head toward me, eyes wide, like he'd opened a closet and found another world. I crossed the distance in 2 steps and gently pulled the panel closed, my hand steady even as my stomach dropped. I scooped Noah up, held him against my shoulder, and kissed his hair like I could erase what we'd both seen. What kind of home needs hidden doors? As I carried him back toward the soft light of the sitting room, I looked around the east wing again at the cozy couch, the warm kitchen, the garden bench, a buffer zone, and that meant the main house wasn't just rich. It was prepared. I held my son a little tighter and realized I'd brought him into a fortress, and I still didn't know what we were being protected from. The morning it happened, the east wing almost felt like a real home. Not my home, not normal, but there was a rhythm to it that steadied my hands. I had a breakfast tray balanced on my palm toast, cut into small squares for Lily because big bites felt like pressure, and a bowl of cereal for Noah because routine was the only thing his nervous system trusted right now. The cocoa I warmed on the stove smelled like comfort, and I let that scent fill the space on purpose, like it could push the fear back into the walls where it belonged. Lily sat in her usual spot, curled into the corner of the couch with a blanket and one of the books I'd left out. She wasn't reading. She was just existing near it, which counted as progress. When I set the mug down within her reach, she didn't flinch. Her fingers hovered over the handle, then wrapped around it slowly. Heat, choice, consent. I watched her shoulders drop a fraction. Noah noticed too. He didn't celebrate. He just looked at me with that quiet, serious face kids get when they're trying to be brave for adults. Then he went back to lining up his toy cars along the baseboard like he was building a small, orderly world. I told myself to hold on to that. Tiny wins, one breath at a time. I turned down the hallway to bring the tray to the small dining nook, already thinking about the next gentle step. Maybe the courtyard bench later. Maybe crayons if Lily's hand stayed steady. That's when the buffer zone cracked. 2 men stepped out of the main house corridor near Damien's study, and the air in the hallway changed so fast my skin prickled. They weren't staff. Staff moved quietly, eyes down, like they'd been trained to disappear. These men moved like they expected resistance, like their bodies were always half a second away from reacting. One wore an expensive coat that didn't look warm so much as symbolic. The other had the kind of watchful eyes that never fully landed on anything, because they were tracking everything. They saw me and didn't smile. One of them made a small, subtle motion near his jacket, nothing dramatic, nothing I could accuse him of doing. But my mother brain didn't need proof. My mother brain just logged danger. My grip tightened on the tray. Hot cocoa trembled in the mug. For a heartbeat, I felt ridiculously out of place, diner shoes on polished floors, hair still damp from a shower I'd taken too fast, my whole body built for caregiving and survival, not whatever this was. Then Damien appeared. He didn't rush. He simply stepped into the doorway behind them, and it was like the hallway got narrower around him. He angled his body without touching me. But the message was clear. I didn't belong in the middle of this. It should have felt protective. Part of it did. Like a shield sliding into place. The other part felt like being managed. He acknowledged me with a look that said, "Go back. Return to the East Wing. Keep the children calm." His attention shifted back to the men with a controlled intensity that made my throat go dry. I didn't hear much, just the cadence of restrained authority, the kind that keeps ugly things from spilling into public spaces. The men's faces stayed neutral, but their posture changed slightly, the way people adjust when they realize they're not the ones in charge. I backed up because that was the only smart move. I didn't turn my back until I was safely around the corner. Even then, my heart kept thudding like it was trying to warn me in its own language. I carried the tray back to the kitchen with hands that suddenly felt too clumsy for porcelain. I kept my voice soft when I returned to Lily and Noah, kept my face calm, kept the day moving, but the intrusion stayed lodged under my ribs. By night, the mansion felt too quiet to be real. Noah fell asleep with his turtle tucked under his chin, one small hand still curled around the blanket like he didn't fully trust the room. Lily drifted into a light, exhausted sleep that looked more like collapse than rest. I sat in the sitting room for a long time, listening to the hum of the house vents, distant footsteps, a door closing somewhere far away. Close to midnight, I couldn't stand still anymore. I told myself I was just checking locks, just making sure Noah's door was latched the way I liked, just walking off nerves. My feet carried me toward a balcony window that overlooked part of the main house. The glass was cold under my fingertips. The window wasn't fully sealed, just barely cracked, like someone had opened it earlier and forgotten to close it all the way. And through that thin opening, I caught fragments, not full sentences, not explanations, just words that landed heavy. Port expansion, territory, Navarro. I didn't know the details, but I could tell from the way territory was said flat and final that it wasn't about land the way regular people meant it. It was about lines you didn't cross, power you didn't challenge, rules that kept storms contained. Damien's voice came through next, low and controlled, and even without hearing every word, I understood the shape of it. Refusal, boundary, the kind of no that doesn't negotiate. Another voice pressed back sharper, impatient, like someone testing what they could get away with. The tension climbed, not loud, just tight, like wire under strain. Then I caught a phrase that froze my blood. Something about information getting out. Someone inside. A leak. I pressed my forehead lightly to the wall beside the window, trying to make my breathing quiet. Inside his organization, inside his circle. If that was true, then gates and cameras and hidden doors weren't guarantees. They were just layers. If the danger is already inside the house, where do you run? My mind snapped to Noah's sleeping face, to Lily's small hands wrapped around a warm mug, to the hidden corridor Noah had found by accident, as if the mansion itself had been built on the assumption that betrayal was inevitable. I pulled back from the window like the cold could burn me. My heart was pounding so hard it made my ears ring. I moved through the hallway without turning on lights, checking on Noah first, because that's what I always did. His breathing was steady. His cheeks were warm. He didn't stir when I brushed hair off his forehead. Then I checked Lily, just a glance, making sure she was still tucked in, still here. I stood between their doors for a long moment, the mansion's silence pressing in, and made myself a promise. I would keep the kids calm. I would keep the routine intact. I would protect every inch of progress we'd fought for, even if the adult storm was already building. And the safest thing I could do next was help Lily find her way back to words before fear stole them again. The house changed after that night at the cracked window. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtler than that, more men in the hallways, more doors that clicked a little sooner than they used to, more quiet conversations that stopped the second I turned a corner. The staff moved faster, eyes lowered, like everyone was pretending the air wasn't heavier. Even the East Wing felt different. Same soft lamps, same clean linens. But now the silence had edges. Lily felt it before I did. For a couple of days after our small progress, she'd been almost reachable. Not talkative, not suddenly okay, but willing to sit closer, willing to hold the cocoa mug without bracing like it might explode. Then the mansion's tension rose, and she folded back into herself like a paper crane collapsing in a storm. Her eyes stopped meeting mine. Her hands clenched again until her knuckles went pale. She began choosing corners behind the couch, beside the curtain, anywhere she could shrink. She stopped touching books. She stopped touching anything that wasn't necessary. The little calm we'd built started sliding away. No one noticed. He got quieter, too. He lined his toy cars in tighter rows, like order could keep danger from leaking under the doors. He stuck close to me when we walked from room to room, his small fingers always finding my sleeve. That morning, I tried the routine anyway. Breakfast, warm drink, a short story, gentle choices. Lily stayed physically present but emotionally unreachable. And I could feel my own frustration rising not at her, never at her, but at the way fear stole everything. It took our work and erased it overnight. I looked at her small shoulders and thought, if I keep pushing the schedule like it's a life raft, she's going to drown under it. So I broke the plan. I told myself I was making a clinical decision. The way nurses adjust care based on what's actually happening, not what's supposed to happen. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't watch her disappear again. I took her hand, not gripping, just offering, and led her down the corridor toward the greenhouse I'd seen once, when staff gave me the property tour. The solarium sat like a secret inside the mansion. Glass roof, plants arranged in soft chaos, warm air that smelled like damp soil and life. Even in winter, it felt like summer breathing quietly in a corner. Lily hesitated at the threshold. Her gaze flicked upward, tracking raindrops tapping the glass like tiny fingers. Or maybe it was stars that night. I couldn't tell if the sky was clearing or just pretending. Either way, the roof made the outside world feel far away. I brought a blanket and 2 mugs of hot chocolate, the kind with marshmallows that melt into little creamy islands. I wasn't trying to bribe her. I was trying to create a cocoon, warmth, sweetness, softness, anything that told her body it could unclench. We sat on a bench, surrounded by green leaves and quiet. Lily tucked her knees up. I tucked the blanket around both of us, like we were hiding from weather even though we were safe indoors. Her mug sat in her hands, steam curling up near her face. I didn't look at her directly. I looked at a broad-leafed plant beside us, a peace lily with glossy leaves that caught the light. Then I did something that probably would have made me feel foolish anywhere else. I started talking to the plant. Not in a cute way, not like a performance, more like I had nowhere else to put the words and the plant was the only thing that wouldn't interrupt or judge. I told it I'd been carrying too much for too long. I told it I was always measuring life in trade-offs, money for time, safety for freedom, sleep for survival. I told it that being a single mom meant my mind never truly turned off, because the world could take so much from you in one careless moment. I admitted, softly, that I was scared. Not just of whatever storm was brewing in Damien's world, but of what fear did to kids, how it rewrote them, how it made them blame themselves for things they didn't control. I told the plant I cared about a little girl who was trying to hold her grief like it was a secret she could keep from hurting anyone else. I said out loud that sometimes the heaviest things get lighter when we share them, even if we share them badly, even if the words come out broken. Then I stopped, and I let the quiet breathe. Minutes passed. The marshmallows sank slowly. Rain tapped the glass in a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. I didn't fill the silence. I didn't chase her eyes. I just sat there, warm and present, letting my own breathing stay slow so hers could borrow it. I had almost accepted that this was simply a comfort visit, nothing more, when Lily's body went very still beside me. Not the stiff stillness of fear. A different kind. Like she was standing at the edge of something, deciding whether to step in. And then she spoke. Not a single word. Not a sound. A full sentence that came out small and shaky, but clear enough that my chest tightened with it. She told me she had heard her parents arguing the day before her mom died. She said her mom wanted to take her away, somewhere else, because the world around her dad felt dangerous. She said she had pretended to be asleep so they wouldn't stop because of her. I kept my face neutral, even as my heart raced. I nodded gently, the way you do when you want someone to keep going without feeling pushed. My hands stayed on the blanket, not reaching for her, letting her stay in control of the distance. Lily's voice wavered, but it didn't vanish. She confessed that the next day she got sick and couldn't go with her mom like planned. And after that, her mom was gone. The way she explained it wasn't dramatic. It was child logic, a straight line drawn between two moments that shouldn't be connected, but felt connected to her anyway. The guilt in her eyes was unbearable, like she believed her body had betrayed her mom, like she believed one stomachache had rewritten fate. I reflected back what I heard without dressing it up, that she'd been wondering if things would have been different if she hadn't gotten sick, that she'd been carrying a maybe that had no end. Lily's hands trembled around the mug. She told me she hadn't told her dad she heard the fight. She told me she thought he would be angry, or sad, or both. She told me she knew things about him she wasn't supposed to know. And then, in the simplest words a child could use, she admitted she believed her father hurt people who broke rules, that men came and went, that boundaries mattered, that when someone crossed a line, the house changed. She didn't give details. She didn't need to. The certainty in her small voice was enough to make my stomach go cold. I wanted to say 100 things. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to promise her the world could be gentle. Instead, I did what caregiving had taught me. I made the moment safe first. I told her, in the calmest way I could, that none of this was her fault. Not the fight, not the sickness, not the things adults chose. I told her missing her mom didn't mean she was broken. It meant she loved her. Her face crumpled, and weeks of silence finally spilled out as quiet sobs that shook her whole body. I shifted closer and held her steady, firm, warm, letting her cry into the blanket like the greenhouse itself could absorb the sound. That was when the air in the doorway changed. Not with a sound, exactly. More like the room held its breath. I lifted my eyes without moving my body, and in the dim light beyond the plants, I saw him. Damien stood in the solarium entrance, still as stone, rainwater glinting on his coat like he'd been outside or moving through the house without anyone daring to stop him. His face wasn't cold now. It was stripped down to something raw and quiet, like a man hearing the truth from his child for the first time. He didn't step closer. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. And all I could think, as I held Lily tighter and felt the mansion's invisible lines shift under my feet, was this. What happens when a child finally tells the truth, and the person she fears most is listening? The first sign wasn't a shout or a siren. It was a click. A soft, precise sound that didn't belong to any ordinary house. It came from somewhere deep in the walls, followed by another, then a low mechanical whisper like something sealing itself shut. The kind of noise you only notice when your body has already decided you're not safe. I stood in the hallway outside the solarium, Lily still warm against my side from crying, my arms remembering the weight of her truth. The mansion had been holding its breath all day, but now it exhaled into a different silence, one that felt rehearsed. More clicks, a gentle chirp, then the faintest vibration through the floorboards, as if the house itself was shifting into position. I moved before I fully understood why. Mother instincts don't wait for explanations. As I turned toward the east wing, I saw staff gliding with purpose, not panicked, not rushed, just efficient. Doors that were normally left open eased closed, locks engaged with tiny metallic snaps. Somewhere above, shutters began to descend over windows, muffling the outside world until even the rain sounded farther away. The fortress was waking up. Elias Vance appeared like he'd been summoned by the system itself. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The urgency lived in the way he held his shoulders, and the way his eyes checked the corridor behind me first, then the corners. He made it clear, with a calm that felt almost too practiced, that we needed to move. Immediately, Lily, Noah, the safe room. My stomach dropped at the words, even though I'd already seen the hidden seams in the east wing walls. Even though I'd suspected this house had a second skeleton inside it. I nodded like I was in control. Inside, my mind was sprinting. I found Noah in the sitting room, crouched by his toy cars. He looked up, and the question on his face was so pure it hurt. Are we in trouble? Are you scared? Should I be scared too? I forced my voice into the same steady cadence I used during fevers and nightmares. I touched his hair once, a grounding motion, and guided him to stand. I repeated a simple rule in my head like a prayer. Calm hands, calm voice, calm eyes. Lily didn't need instructions. That was the part that broke me a little. The second Elias indicated the direction, she moved like she'd done it before. She reached for her comfort object without hesitation, her body already shrinking into a guarded shape. Familiar fear, familiar procedure. A child shouldn't know how to evacuate a home. Noah stayed close, trying to be brave in that stiff way kids get when they think bravery means silence. He hooked 2 fingers into my sleeve. I held Lily's hand with my other. My arms stretched between both children like a human bridge, and followed Elias through corridors that suddenly felt longer than they should. The mansion's luxury disappeared as we moved, not replaced by ugliness, replaced by function. Corners covered by discreet cameras, doors that opened with keypads, a hidden panel that slid aside with a smooth, silent mechanism that made my skin prickle. Behind it, a stairwell, then another door. The safe room wasn't a bunker. It was a concealed apartment. Soft couch, warm lighting, a small kitchenette stocked with water, tea, and snacks, arranged like someone cared about comfort during emergencies. A bathroom, 2 sleeping areas, and along one wall monitors, dozens of them. Every approach to the property, every gate, every driveway curve, every shadowed corner under trees. The blue glow washed over my hands as I guided Noah to the couch. The door sealed behind us with a clean final sound that made my chest tighten. I breathed in, counted to 4, breathed out, counted again. Noah's eyes flicked from the monitors to me, as if the screens were less important than my expression. Lily curled into the corner with her comfort object pressed to her chest, gaze lowered, shoulders high. The greenhouse breakthrough felt suddenly fragile, like a candle flame in a draft. I made cocoa the way I always did when I needed to make the world smaller. Warm, sweet, predictable. I set out a board game Noah liked and let him move pieces without needing to talk. I kept my touch gentle, smoothing Noah's hair, rubbing Lily's hands through the blanket, repeating calm in my body so they could borrow it. Minutes stretched into something thick. On the monitors, the world looked ordinary and terrifying at the same time. Rain on camera lenses, security staff moving in coordinated patterns, a gate light flaring as it scanned the perimeter. Nothing dramatic, which somehow made it worse. This wasn't a reaction to chaos. This was protocol. Elias stayed near the control panel, checking feeds, listening to something in his earpiece. At one point, he stepped closer to me and lowered his voice even more, like the walls could hear. He gave me the reason in fragments, the way people do when they're careful with words. Navarro. Testing boundaries after the port incident. A message, not random, and then the detail that turned my blood cold. They weren't just watching Damien. They knew about me. Elias made it clear that my name had come up, that my connection to Lily was not invisible, that bringing me into this house had made me part of the equation, and because Noah was mine, that meant he wasn't just a child in the wrong place. He was leverage. He was risk. He was a target by association. I stared at the monitors until my eyes burned, then looked at Noah's small body curled on the couch, his face trying to stay brave, and felt a wave of guilt so strong it nearly knocked the air out of me. I had brought my child into a fortress, and now I understood why a fortress existed. I tightened the blanket around Lily and Noah, kept my voice low and steady, kept my breathing slow. Inside, dread sharpened into something harder. Resolve. I would keep them calm. I would keep them safe. I would not let fear steal Lily's words again or steal Noah's childhood piece by piece. But as the monitors glowed and the door stayed sealed, one thought kept circling my mind like a warning bell. How do you protect your child when the storm isn't outside anymore? The first sign the night was shifting back wasn't relief. It was the monitors' changing tone. The constant hum that had become my metronome softened, and a few of the screens flickered as if the system was reassigning priorities. Somewhere beyond the sealed door, I heard the faintest series of mechanical sounds, locks, cycling, shutters easing up, the house exhaling out of its clenched posture. Elias didn't announce anything. He simply straightened, listened, and then moved to the panel with the calm certainty of someone following a script he'd rehearsed too many times. The heavy door released with a smooth, controlled hiss, and a cooler draft slid into the safe room, carrying the smell of rain. For a second, I just stood there, hand hovering over Noah's blanket, afraid to let my body believe we were okay. Then Damien Cross stepped through. He didn't stumble. He didn't look frantic. But he looked worn in a way I hadn't seen yet. His coat was soaked, darker with rain, and one sleeve hung wrong, torn at the seam like it had caught on something and been yanked free. The collar of his shirt was rumpled, and there was a faint smear near it, dry, rust-colored, not fresh, but enough to make my stomach tighten. His jaw held tension like he'd been clenching it for hours. Still, his eyes went straight to Lily. All the hardness in him shifted, just for that second. Like whatever storm he'd walked through, his body remembered how to be a father before it remembered how to be anything else. Lily moved before I could even reach for her. A moment ago she'd been curled into herself, clutching her comfort object like a lifeline. Now she shot forward, small feet on the carpet, arms out, desperation and relief tangled together. She crashed into him with the kind of force only a child can have when she's been holding everything in for too long. Damien dropped to meet her, wrapping her up like he'd been starving for that contact. He held her close, one hand bracing the back of her head, the other firm around her shoulders, as if he could physically keep the world from touching her. And then it happened. The word I'd been waiting for. The one that had felt like a locked door in her throat. She said it one clean, clear name for him, like a bell ringing through months of silence. It hit me so hard my eyes burned. Relief flooded through me first, hot and dizzying. Lily was alive. Damien was here. The connection was real. The breakthrough wasn't just mine in a greenhouse. It had reached the person she'd been circling from a distance. And then dread followed right behind it, sharp as a needle. Because her progress was being forged in crisis. Because the safe room had become the place where she finally felt safe enough to speak. Because what kind of childhood makes normal something you promise after a lockdown? Noah watched from the couch, his face carefully blank, like he didn't want to make this moment about him. But his fingers tightened on the blanket, and his eyes kept darting to Damien's torn sleeve the way kids notice the wrong things and can't stop noticing. Damien guided Lily out of the safe room with a tenderness so specific it made the rest of him feel even more dangerous by contrast. He didn't make a big show. He didn't ask for an audience. He simply carried her as if her weight was nothing and her safety was everything. By the time I got Noah resettled, the safe room felt like it had drained the warmth out of my bones. I tucked him in again, smoothing his hair the same way I had 100 times tonight, repeating calm through my hands because my voice didn't feel steady enough. When I finally stepped into the kitchenette area near the east wing, Damien was there, shoulders slightly slumped for the first time since I'd met him. The light caught the exhaustion under his control. He looked at me and, for once, there was no evaluation in it, no filing away, just something raw and quiet. He made it clear without ceremony that he knew I'd kept the children steady, that I'd done what he couldn't do while he was gone. It wasn't an offer. It wasn't leverage. It was gratitude. And it felt so unfamiliar in this house that it almost hurt more than the fear. I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to throw it back at him, to ask what kind of life required a safe room in the first place. Another part of me wanted to cling to any scrap of humanity that proved this wasn't all just power and consequence. Before I could decide, the air shifted again. Elias entered with the same composed urgency he'd carried all night. But something was off, an extra tightness around his eyes, a slight speed to his movements. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't have to. He delivered the next truth like a blade slipped into the room. Someone trusted had been compromised. Not an outsider pressing at the gate. Someone inside the machine. Someone who knew routines, names, access points. Someone who could turn a fortress into a map. And Navarro wasn't guessing anymore. They knew my name. They knew why Lily had reached for me. They knew I wasn't just a caretaker in a wing of the house. I was a lever. Damien changed instantly. The tired father vanished behind a colder, sharper focus that made the room feel smaller. He issued new containment orders with brutal efficiency. The east wing sealed tighter, entry controlled. No movement without direct authorization. More protection, not less. And then he did something that made my stomach flip in a different way. He included Noah, not as an afterthought, not as collateral, explicitly, as if my son's safety had been added to the list of non-negotiables. I should have felt grateful. I did, in some small part of me. But the larger part felt protective anger flare up so fast it tasted bitter. Because the only reason my child needed to be explicitly protected by a man like Damien Cross was because I had walked him into this world with my own 2 hands. Damien moved away toward the main house, already pulling the storm back into himself, already becoming the kind of man who didn't ask twice because he couldn't afford to. I stood in the east wing doorway, watching security double in the hall like shadows thickening. Then I went back to Noah's bed and watched him breathe, until my heartbeat matched his. The terrifying truth settled over me like another blanket I couldn't pull off. Damien didn't just bring me into his world. He pulled my child into it too. And if they can reach me through my child, what will they do next? For a few hours that morning, I almost let myself pretend we were normal. Not normal like my old life, no cramped kitchen, no neighbor's TV bleeding through thin walls, but normal in the way a body craves after a night of fear. Warm food, sticky fingers, a quiet laugh that doesn't come with an alarm attached. Damien had kept his promise in the simplest way. Pancakes. The smell drifted into the east wing like a peace offering butter, vanilla, something sweet that made Noah's face soften before he could stop it. Lily sat at the table with her mug, shoulders still guarded, but she watched the plate like she remembered what comfort used to look like. Noah dipped his pancake in syrup with the seriousness of a tiny scientist. Lily held a brush later in the morning, hovering over watercolor paper like the act of choosing a color was its own kind of courage. I kept breathing slow, counting the way I'd counted in the safe room, telling myself that maybe the fortress had done its job and we'd made it through the worst. I was rinsing brushes at the small sink when I felt it. Not a sound at first. A pressure change. A shift in the air like the mansion's lungs tightening. Then the perimeter alarm hit. It wasn't loud in a dramatic way. It was sharp, controlled, unmistakable, an alert designed to move people, not panic them. Immediately after, the house came alive with coordinated footsteps and muffled calls traveling down hallways like a chain reaction. Doors clicked. Locks engaged. Somewhere deeper in the estate, shutters began their mechanical descent. Lily's brush slipped from her fingers. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just went still, eyes wide, body snapping back into that familiar fold of fear, like this was a script she knew by heart. Noah looked at me. His eyes asked everything at once. I forced my face to stay calm. I moved fast, but not frantic. That's the trick when kids are watching you. Speed without panic, urgency without chaos. Elias appeared in the east wing doorway within seconds. His posture told me this wasn't a drill. He didn't waste time explaining. The message was clear through his motion, and the way he gestured. Now. Move. Safe room. I grabbed Noah's hand and Lily's hand at the same time, and felt both of them clamp onto me like I was the only solid thing left in the world. Lily's palm was cold and damp. Noah's was warm but trembling. We moved through service corridors this time, not the polished main hallways. The back routes were narrower, quieter, built for function. Staff stepped aside as we passed, faces tense but controlled, like they'd practiced their roles 100 times. The mansion was doing what it was built to do. Still, my mind kept screaming one thought over and over. It's happening again. It's happening in the place I brought my child. We reached a junction and everything bottlenecked. 2 security men moved ahead, scanning. Another came from the opposite direction. And for a split second, there was confusion, silent signals, quick glances, the kind of wordless coordination that breaks when something doesn't match the plan. That's when I heard it. A heavy impact somewhere in the house. Not close enough to see, close enough to feel. Then the brittle sound of something giving way, wood splintering, glass breaking. A sharp report that made Noah flinch so hard his whole body jerked. My instincts didn't wait. I pulled both kids against me and kept moving. But the corridor ahead was no longer clear. Security shifted positions, pushing us toward the nearest hardened route, which, in this house, meant the area near Damien's study and the concealed access to the safe room. We turned a corner too fast and nearly collided with the edge of the storm. The study door was partially open. Inside, shadows moved in ways they shouldn't. The air smelled like rain dragged indoors, and something sharper I didn't want to name. One guard stepped forward, then stopped, his whole stance changing like he'd spotted something that turned the hallway into a trap. He motioned us in with urgency because sometimes the safest place is the one you can lock. I didn't question it. I dragged the children into the study and shut the door behind us. My eyes snapped to the bookcase I'd noticed earlier, the one that looked too heavy and too purposeful. Lily's gaze went there too. She knew. Of course she knew. I dropped to the children's level and used my hands, not my words. I pressed Noah behind the couch first, then guided Lily toward the bookcase, where the hidden panel seam ran like a secret scar in the wall. I could feel Noah's breath quicken. I could feel Lily's body vibrating with silent fear. I made myself breathe slowly so they could borrow it. Then the door shuttered. Not once, twice, a third time, and the frame splintered. The sound cracked through the room like lightning. My whole body went cold and hot at the same time. Figures pushed into the study, faces mostly obscured by darkness and rain. Movements fast and purposeful. I couldn't tell you what they carried. I didn't look long enough. My eyes stayed on Lily and Noah. That was all that mattered. One of the intruders' attention snapped to me. I could feel it the way you feel a spotlight. The energy of it said they weren't here for furniture. I knew then, with terrible clarity, that this wasn't an abstract threat outside the gate. This was inside the house, inside the room, and the safe route was narrowing by the second. My mind didn't have time to create a plan. It only had time for one decision. Buy seconds. I did the only thing an exhausted single mom with no tactical training can do when her kids are about to be found. I moved. Not smart. Not elegant. Not heroic. I threw my weight into the moment, lunging toward the closest body with the messy ferocity of someone who has held a feverish child through the night and still shown up to work in the morning. I grabbed fabric, shoved, clawed for space. Anything to force their attention onto me instead of the corner where Lily and Noah were disappearing. My shoulder slammed into something hard. Pain burst down my arm. My breath left me in a grunt I didn't recognize as my own. But it worked. For a few seconds, the intruders' focus shifted. Their momentum broke. Their head turned toward me instead of the bookcase. And in that sliver of time, Lily moved. She pulled Noah's small hand, gripping his wrist, and guided him toward the hidden seam. The panel gave way just enough for them to slip through. Noah looked back once, eyes huge, face pale, like he was trying to memorize me in case this was the last time. I held his gaze and nodded. Not a promise, a command made of love. Go. The next sounds came too fast to process another sharp report. A shout cut off mid-breath, feet sliding on wood. The room blurred at the edges as adrenaline flooded my vision. Then Damien was there. I didn't see him enter so much as I felt the space change around him. Controlled, immediate, final. He moved with ruthless efficiency. But what I remember most isn't the threat ending. It's what he did in the same breath, how he angled his body so Lily wouldn't see anything ugly as she reached the safe passage. How his arm cut across the line of sight like a shield. How his focus stayed split between neutralizing danger and protecting his child from trauma. The study went quiet in a way that felt unnatural after all that sound. My knees hit the floor. I didn't remember choosing to drop. My hands shook so hard they looked like someone else's. My lungs burned like I'd been underwater. The door behind the bookcase opened a crack, and I heard the softest movement Noah's breathing, Lily's tiny whimper alive. That was when my body finally understood I'd made it. Not safe, not over, but alive. Damien's presence filled the room like a storm contained in human skin. Elias appeared at the threshold, face tight, security moving in coordinated sweeps beyond the doorway. The fortress was still awake, still searching for the last thread of danger. I pressed my palm to my chest, forcing air in, forcing my voice not to break, as I focused on the only thing that mattered. The kids. First, then, as my adrenaline crashed and reality settled like ash, I realized the line I'd crossed. I wasn't a bystander anymore. I wasn't someone who could clock out. I had fought for seconds in Damien Cross's war. And those seconds tied my safety, and Noah's, to him in a way I could never undo. After the noise, the house did something I didn't expect. It got clean, not emotionally, not spiritually, but physically, like money and discipline could erase the fact that strangers had crossed the same floors where Lily painted and Noah ate syrup with his whole face. Staff moved in soft shoes. Doors were rehung. Glass was replaced. The air even smelled different, like citrus cleaner laid over smoke you couldn't quite forget. I tried to do a normal thing with shaking hands. I wiped a counter that didn't need wiping. I refilled a mug that no one was drinking from. My body kept running the emergency, even though the alarms had gone quiet. Lily was safe, but fragile in that exhausted way children get after fear drains them dry. She clutched her comfort object in her sleep like it was a second heartbeat. Her lashes were still damp, her shoulders still tight even while dreaming. Every so often she'd twitch and I'd feel my own muscles answer, ready to grab her and run again. Noah was worse in a quieter way. He wasn't crying. He wasn't asking a million questions like he normally would. He was too careful watching corners, staying close enough to touch me, trying to be brave because he'd seen me be brave. That kind of bravery breaks my heart. Kids shouldn't have to earn calm. When I finally got them both settled, Lily in the East Wing bedroom, Noah curled on the couch because he couldn't stand the idea of being alone behind a closed door. I slipped away to the solarium. The greenhouse had been our one honest room. Warm air, green leaves, a ceiling of glass that didn't pretend storms weren't real. Rain tapped overhead in small, patient rhythms, like the world reminding me it was still moving outside this fortress. I stood there for a long time, palms pressed to the edge of a planter, breathing until my chest stopped shaking. Then I said the truth out loud to the quiet room. Like naming it would keep it from swallowing me. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep calling this a job, or a temporary arrangement, or a weird chapter I'd laugh about someday. I had just lived through the consequences of Damien Cross's world inside a house with children. My son's child-normal morning had been split in half by alarms and hidden doors. Lily's fragile progress had been forced to grow in the shadow of danger. I heard footsteps behind me before I turned. Not rushed, not creeping, just controlled. Damien appeared in the doorway without making the moment dramatic. His posture was still that same disciplined calm, but the edges of him looked tired, like he'd been carrying weight all day without setting it down. He didn't crowd me. He didn't fill the room on purpose. He simply arrived, as if he'd known this is where truth would finally corner us. I didn't soften for him. I couldn't. My anger wasn't about pride. It wasn't about me wanting power or respect. It was the kind of anger that comes from seeing your child's fear and realizing you put him in the path of it. It was the kind of anger that makes your voice steady because if it cracks, you'll never stop shaking. In my head, I laid it out in simple sentences because complicated feelings were too dangerous right then. This happened here, where kids sleep, where pancakes were still warm on plates, and it happened because of him. Damien didn't deny it. He didn't insult my intelligence by dressing it up as bad luck. He acknowledged what the attack was meant to do: pressure, territory, a message sent through the place he cared about most. He made it clear that Lily wasn't just a child to them, she was a lever. And because Lily had attached to me because she had chosen my voice in the rain and my hands in the greenhouse, that made me a lever too. And that made Noah. My throat tightened so hard I had to swallow twice. Part of the equation. That was the moment I felt something in me settle. Not acceptance. Agency. I set my boundary in my own mind first, then let it exist between us like a line on the floor. I was here for the children. For Lily's healing. For Noah's safety. Not for his empire. Not for his rules. Not to be folded into his world until my name was just another asset under his roof. I wouldn't be owned. I wouldn't be silenced. I wouldn't be handled like a detail that could be managed. If staying here meant becoming smaller, becoming quiet, becoming grateful enough to ignore what this life costs, then I would take my kids and walk straight into uncertainty before I let that happen. Damien listened the way men like him listen, still, focused, letting your words land before he decides what to do with them. And then he did what he always does. He made it practical. He offered a plan, not a speech. He could fast-track my nursing transfer paperwork. He could stabilize my school, my schedule, the kind of stability I'd been chasing with double shifts and late fees and exhaustion. He could put real security around me and Noah that didn't depend on luck or locked doors I didn't control. He could make sure Lily stayed emotionally steady by keeping her world consistent: same rooms, same routines, same caregiver through a defined stretch of time. Through the summer, until the situation calmed. He didn't frame it like a favor. It felt more like a contract dressed as protection. A trade. Safety and opportunity in exchange for staying close enough to keep Lily from breaking again. And the terrifying part was that it made sense. That's what shook me the most. Because every mom decision I've ever made has been a kind of math. Rent versus groceries. Tuition versus sleep. Being present versus keeping the lights on. And now the equation had new variables. A child who finally spoke. A son who'd learned what alarms sound like. And a man whose protection came with strings. I stared up at the glass roof and watched rain slide down like slow tears. If protection comes with strings, is it still protection? Damien's presence lingered at the edge of the room, controlled as ever, but careful like he knew pushing would snap something, and he needed me whole for the kids. And then he let one more idea hover in the space between us without forcing it. That staying in Seattle, in this house, in this battleground, might not be the smartest way to keep the children safe. A relocation. A strategic move. A way to pull the target away from the center of the fight. My stomach tightened. Not just with fear, but with the sudden awareness that my outside life wasn't going to politely wait while I decided. Noah's father. Custody. School deadlines. Rent. The world I'd been juggling before Damien ever stepped into my rain-soaked night. I turned back toward the East Wing with my heart pounding, already feeling the next decision forming. Not whether I trusted Damien. Whether I could survive what leaving or staying would do to my kids. The idea of leaving Seattle should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like my lungs didn't know whether to inhale or brace. Damien's plan wasn't dressed up as a vacation or a reward. He framed it the way you frame an evacuation. Remove Lily from the center of the pressure. Shrink the number of places Navarro could reach. And stop using my name and my son's face as leverage. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere harder to access. The kind of place people call peaceful because they've never needed peace for survival. I pictured the San Juan Islands the way I'd seen them online when I was too tired to sleep: gray water, evergreen edges, Houses that look like they belong to people who don't count grocery money. A ferry ride away from everything familiar, but also a world away from the kind of sirens that had echoed through Damien's halls. I hated how much it made sense. I also hated what it did to my pride. Because part of me still wanted to believe I could solve this the way I solve everything. Work more, sleep less, keep my head down, keep Noah safe through sheer willpower. But willpower doesn't stop men who treat children like bargaining chips. It doesn't stop cameras from catching the wrong angle. It doesn't stop a story from spreading faster than the truth. And I couldn't ignore the way Noah had been walking around the East Wing like a tiny soldier since the attack. Quiet, careful, watching every door like it might bite. Uprooting him felt cruel. Keeping him here felt worse. I was standing in the East Wing kitchen, staring at a half-packed tote bag like it might answer me, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a notification that made my stomach drop so hard it felt like I missed a step. It wasn't daycare. It wasn't school. It was Noah's father. An email, then a second message stacked behind it, full of formal language and cold intent. He wasn't asking how Noah was. He wasn't offering help. He was circling the moment like a vulture, using the attack, the danger, the optics of where my son had been sleeping, to threaten what he'd always dangled over my head when he wanted control. Custody. The word didn't need to be written in bold to punch me in the chest. My hands went numb. My throat tightened. My brain flashed through a reel of worst-case scenes. A judge's face, Noah's small hand slipping out of mine, my son being taken because I couldn't prove I'd made the right choices. It didn't matter that Noah's father had been inconsistent. It didn't matter that he'd missed birthdays, skipped support, disappeared when parenting wasn't convenient. In his mind, none of that mattered now. Fear was a tool, and he was finally using it well. I leaned against the counter and forced myself to breathe the way I'd done in the safe room. In for 4. Hold. Out for 6. Again. My heart still hammered like it didn't believe breathing could fix anything. And then I realized something that made my skin crawl. Navarro was using leverage. My ex was using leverage. Different worlds, same tactic. Find the soft spot. Press until the person breaks. Damien didn't burst in with fury. He didn't make a show. He didn't talk about payback. Elias appeared first, calm but urgent, and the way he moved told me the message had already been seen by someone besides me. A few minutes later, Damien entered the East Wing like he was walking into a meeting, not a crisis. His face stayed controlled, but his eyes sharpened the moment he took in my posture and the way my fingers were gripping the phone like it might disappear. He looked at the screen once, then he did what I didn't expect a man like him to do. He chose paperwork over violence. He made it clear through action, not comfort, that if my ex wanted a fight, he'd get it in a courtroom, not a hallway. Damien's people moved like a machine, switching tasks, attorneys contacted, documentation pulled, timelines compiled. They didn't dig for gossip. They dug for facts, missed payments, gaps in involvement, messages that proved patterns of neglect. The kind of record I'd never had the time or money to organize, because I'd been busy keeping a child fed. Damien didn't make promises wrapped in romance. He made something colder and steadier, protection that left a paper trail. I felt relief. And then I hated myself for feeling it, because relief meant dependence. Dependence meant strings. And yet, what was my alternative? Let my ex weaponize fear until I lost Noah? Pretend I could outwork a legal system with a diner paycheck? The exit door Damien offered wasn't just about Navarro anymore. It was about keeping my son out of a trap that had been set long before I stepped into a rain-soaked public square and answered an unknown number. By the time the attorney's plan was laid out, my hands had stopped shaking, but my chest still felt bruised from the impact of realizing how quickly my life could be rewritten by people with power. Damien's relocation plan came back into focus, heavier now. Not luxury, not escape. A strategic retreat before the next blow landed. I looked down the hall toward Noah, listening for his breathing, and I knew the choice was closing in around me. Leaving Seattle might be the only way to keep Noah and Lily safe. But if every road out still led through Damien Cross, was it freedom or a different kind of cage? Damien lingered by the doorway when the flurry of legal action moved on, and I felt the shift before he even moved, like he was about to add one more weight to the scale. He didn't press. He didn't plead. He simply made it clear there was something else I needed to know before we left. Something about my past, and the ground under my feet, already unstable, started to tilt again. The house sounded different on the night we left. Not louder, not quieter, just organized. Like every hallway had a purpose, and every footstep had a destination. Bags sat by the East Wing door in neat rows. Noah's little backpack was on top of mine, the zipper half open because he'd insisted on packing his own important stuff, and then forgotten what he'd chosen. Lily moved like a shadow beside me, clutching her comfort object, watching the adults with wide, careful eyes. She wasn't silent the way she used to be, not locked behind a wall, but she was quiet in the way a child gets quiet when they're trying to understand a world that keeps changing without asking. Security drifted through the background like weather. Radios low, doors checked twice, a car idling somewhere beyond the windows. It should have made me feel safe. Instead, it reminded me that safety was something being engineered, not something we naturally had. Noah leaned against my hip while I tightened the strap on my tote bag. He didn't ask questions out loud. He just kept looking up at me like he was collecting answers from my face. I smoothed his hair back, the way I did when he was sick, and forced my voice steady in my own head. "We're leaving. We're going somewhere quieter. This is the right move," Damien asked without asking if I could meet him in his study before we went. Elias waited at the hallway corner, polite and unreadable, like the house itself had learned to stand guard. The study felt exactly how it had felt the first time. Old money calm, heavy wood, the kind of stillness that makes you aware of your own breathing. But tonight, the air carried something else. Finality. The sense of a door closing behind me even before I walked through it. Damien was already there. He looked composed, but there was a tired line to him that hadn't been there before. Not weakness. More like someone who'd stopped pretending everything cost nothing. On the desk sat a manila folder. My name was typed across it in clean black letters. Seeing my name like that did something to me. It wasn't just paper. It was the same feeling I'd had looking at scholarship letters I never received, like my life had been handled by strangers behind closed doors. Damien didn't drag it out. He didn't dramatize it. He made it clear there was one more truth I deserved before I stepped into the next chapter under his protection. When I opened the folder, the first pages weren't even about him. They were about my parents. My chest tightened so fast I had to pause. Fingers braced on the edge of the desk. I could suddenly smell wet plywood and river water, like my body had been waiting years for someone to say the right words to unlock the memory. I had spent my whole life calling that night an accident. A flood, bad luck, a system failure, weather that didn't care who was good or who was trying. Damien made me understand, piece by piece, that it wasn't just weather. My parents hadn't died because nature was cruel and random. They had been targeted, punished. Not for what they did, but for what my father refused to do. A rival crew, Donovan, wanted him to cooperate in money cleaning. My father said no. And the kind of people who demand obedience don't accept no as an answer. The disaster conditions that night, they weren't purely natural. The warning that came too late. The systems that failed in the exact places they shouldn't have failed. The way everything went wrong in a chain that felt like bad luck but now looked like a hand pushing dominoes. I sat down because my knees stopped being reliable. Grief is weird. You think you've already grieved something completely. You think it's finished. Then the story behind it changes, and the grief changes shape too. It comes back sharper. Not because you miss them more, but because you realize they were taken from you in a way you never consented to understand. Anger rose in me like heat. Not the kind that makes you reckless. The kind that makes you clear. Donovan. A name I'd never known. A shadow I'd never been allowed to see. And then Damien revealed the part that made my skin prickle with something close to terror. Years ago, long before I ever answered a trembling call in the rain, the Cross organization wiped Donovan out during a turf war. Not as a personal mission for my family, not as a noble act, as business, as territory, as a brutal kind of conflict that had its own logic, which meant something I didn't know how to hold. His world had avenged my family without knowing we existed. My life had been circling this world since childhood, like an orbit I never chose. I stared at my name on the folder again, at the dates that lined up like a cruel calendar, and I felt fate pressing against my ribs. Not romantic, not magical, just frighteningly real. Power had always been near me. I just didn't have words for it. Damien couldn't rewrite what he was. He didn't pretend he could. But he made something else clear, quietly, almost like a promise offered without manipulation. He could choose what he did next. He could use power like a weapon or like a shield. And he wasn't asking me to surrender myself in exchange for safety. Not ownership, not silence, not gratitude as a leash. I felt my boundary rise in me again, steady as bone. I was going for the children, for Noah's stability, for Lily's healing. I was going because leaving Seattle might be the only way to keep them from being used like leverage again. And I was also going as myself. A nursing student, a mother, A woman who had survived too much to become someone else's possession. I would finish school. I would build a life where love meant protection, not control, where safety didn't require me to disappear. When I stepped out of the study, the house was ready. Noah was half asleep on my shoulder within minutes of getting into the car, his small hand fisted in my jacket like a promise he couldn't say. Lily curled against my other side, finally letting her weight rest on me without flinching. Outside the window, Seattle blurred into wet lights and dark water, and thunder rolled somewhere far off, soft and heavy. For the first time in days, my breathing matched theirs. Not perfect peace, but a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years, the calm of truth, even when it hurts. Because resilience isn't pretending you're fine. It's facing what happened, naming it, and still choosing the next step with your head up. And family? Sometimes it's the people you're born into. Sometimes it's the people you choose. The people you protect. The people you refuse to abandon. If you made it to the end of this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments. And if this hit you in the heart even a little, please like, subscribe, and share so I can keep telling stories that remind us we're not alone.